Camera is this way. Good evening. Welcome to our September 7th iteration of the NSA Ad Hoc. It is 6:03 p.m. I think that I'm going to be the only commissioner here today. Commissioner or Chair Malele is not able to make it. And Commission Counsel is also not able to make it. I see here that we have Mariano Contreras, Jose Dorado, Nick Din, and Lieutenant Hubbard. Why don't we get started? Because there's a good amount to do today. As a initial check-in, perhaps our esteemed chair has sort of given us a gathering question, which is, what do you think the strongest part of our memo is? I'm happy to lead it off, although I very much appreciate and think that we chose and made some strong recommendations that we still, of course, have some work to do in terms of developing and implementing and getting best practices for. I think one thing that will be the strongest part of our memo will be our, hopefully, language around what the culture of OPD is, to name it, to put it into a document, and both for to reflect the present as well as where we want the department to go and get to. I will just take a moment for people to perhaps volunteer, and if not, give people, just start calling on people.
I'll go ahead and start. Thank you so much for putting this memo together. But I would say the biggest thing that stuck out to me is the importance of acknowledging our past and learning from it. And I'm really excited to start our endeavors to learn from our mistakes and getting the right personnel in a position to where they can provide a historical aspect to our new recruits and new officers coming in.
Thank you. That's encouraging to hear. Thank you, Lieutenant Hubbard. Others, thoughts?
Guess I can go next. So I thought that the strongest part of the memo, as I read it, was that I think that it was a clear and sober acknowledgement that the memo is more of a report that identifies the path to the needed change, and rather than concrete policy recommendations. And I thought that that just meant that we are realistic about this. Thank you.
Can I go next?
Please.
I think what I really appreciate, Jesse, and it really shows that you put a lot of work into this, so I appreciate you. But I just hear voices of different commissioners and the community representatives here, and I really appreciate that you took time to weave in some of those recommendations and comments throughout this memo. So it's more of that aspect of it felt strong to me.
Nothing else. The commission is just a selected members of the Oakland community, and hopefully speak for or provide a conduit for which the community can speak through. Thank you. Mr. Dorado, that leaves you.
Well, I got a couple things. One is that that the mayor's comment about integrating OPD culture into Oakland's culture keeps sticking with me. And specifically, what she said about accountability. The thing that really struck me on some reading I did today was how the corruption in various police departments, including OPD, has resulted in the dismissal of some very serious charges among some serious folks. And so it's a long way of saying that it's just so incredibly frustrating to read that who knows how many untold hours went into the building of a case that ultimately, because of the connection between OPD and another police department, the case got the prosecutor was really forced to request dismissal of the case, and these were some very serious charges that the case consisted of. So it just goes back to me that the strongest part of it is demanding accountability, per what the mayor said about integrating OPD culture into OPD and culture into Oakland culture. Certainly that includes accountability. So just incredibly frustrating for me to have read that these cases had to be dismissed, and some guys that really should have been held accountable for what they did basically walked because of the connection, a corrupt connection between an OPD detective and another police department, the racist texts and emails in Contra Costa. To know these guys got to walk because of this connection, this lack of accountability, is just incredibly frustrating. So that's for me the strongest part of what we're trying to do here is put the language in. In fact, we hold people accountable. That's absolutely what we have to be doing. That accountability will result in the culture change we want to see.
Thank you. Yeah, I get that. Feel that. I understand that. Thank you. So why don't we get into it? One of the things that well, why don't we just get into it? Let me switch the screen share just a bit. I'll switch the screen share and then also make it a little bit larger. All right. So what I'll do is I'll go through changes since the last that I have sent. I also want to solicit as much input as possible about the section on culture that we had agreed that we would try to fashion and to do together. And then kind of get us to a sort of consensus point where I can finalize this document after our work tonight and then have it for the commission to both consider in their meetings, both on Monday, September 11th, and again on Thursday, September 14th. I had originally described September 11th as a closed session meeting, but I realized that that might not be the best of ideas because we have two alternate commissioners who aren't going to be able to see this memo. Well, number one, I'm gonna post this online, but they're not going to be able to see and discuss this memo until they see it for the first time on September 14th, and that feels unfair to them. And so I requested an open session on this NSA memo on September 11th. I'm sorry, I changed it up on you all. I had said closed session last time, but I partly did it so that we could get input from the alternate commissioners to be present. I recognize that that is a change, and certainly to the extent that it could have been more public feedback on another day that made things a little bit more difficult. But I also realize the importance of making sure that all our alternate commissioners, sorry, my enunciation is struggling after a day of talking, had multiple opportunities to see the document and to give feedback, because they are the least likely to have seen it if we try to do this through closed session. That's just a heads up to start off with. There's the plan of going through the document, going through the changes, and then working on this culture change section, and then eventually trying to reach some sort of consensus by the end of the meeting. Sound like a good plan to everyone?
Yeah.
Say nods. All right. So let's see. The first change comes in this initial section that I am highlighting. It is a suggestion by Pastor Jackie. She emailed all of us to highlight the fact that conversations about culture change and targeting cultural problems in police departments is not unique to our department, but of course is a national conversation that has been going on for some time. Let's see. I may drop the link into a footnote so it's a little bit easier to read. The next section that is new is a revision to the NSA Memo 1.0, or sorry, follow-up items from NSA Memo 1.0 to sort of lay out what has happened, or sorry, what has been done by the commission since that first memo, and specifically around, excuse me, just going to size down a little bit and then close here so everyone sees it all on one page. Some of the recommendations that were made in that initial memo, and a little bit more information about why those recommendations were made in the first place. Specifically that, excuse me, some of the information sharing and transparency pieces for the IAD investigations that were made public at the beginning of this year and eventually led to the firing of Chief Armstrong stemmed from, and how it was a surprise to everyone and how many people mentioned that the commission was caught asleep, I guess, or were unable to do anything about it, stemmed from a lack of notification and transparency from the monitor, and from being able to really find out what was going on, and the fact that, frankly, what's the phrase? Both the chief and upper management, high-level deputy chiefs, executive staff, that's the word I'm looking for, executive command staff were being investigated for misconduct, which has, as you all may know, an incredibly destabilizing effect and are a very serious nature. Something that the community wants to know, the commission wants to know, so that they can, if they feel it's necessary, begin their own investigation and also keep a pulse on it if they decide not to, so that no one is caught off guard, and the both investigation arm and as well as the policy and auditing arm of the CPRA and the OIG respectively are able to conduct their work and do what the voters wanted from our city, to have oversight of the department and not just defer it to the monitor. Jose?
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, the chair of the commission was notified that there was an investigation going on back in October 22. Am I correct in that?
Are we talking about the investigation into Sergeant Chung or to the chief?
Good question. I'm not sure. I think it was into the chief. I'm not 100% sure of that. I do know that, well, from what I understand, I could dig it out, but I believe that there was a notification to the chair of an investigation going on. I'm not sure whether it was the sergeant or the chief. That's a good question. But if in fact, just for the moment, if it was for the chief, that was I would say enough lead time for at least the chair to find out what the essence of the investigation was about, and certainly to take some action if in fact it was in fact the chief. So I've always been a bit bothered by the line that I hear here in the ad hoc that the commission was caught flat-footed. I'll just put that word on it. But that caught asleep or flat-footed or whatever, not as a fault of their own, when in fact, assuming for the moment that the notice of investigation was about the chief, we're going back to October 22, which gave plenty of time for at least the commission chair to find out what the investigation was all about and plan some sort of action, as opposed to being having the commission be caught flat-footed. So that's predicated on whether or not, you know, the notification was about the chief being investigated, which I don't know. But under that assumption, that was plenty of time for the commission to take action. And even if it was just on the sergeant, I think it behooved the chair, who I understand received the notification, to find out if in fact that went any further. So again, I've just been bothered by this line that I've heard several times about, that the commission didn't have enough time to take action, when I think that they did. And I'll dig out the memo and find out exactly what it said, whether it related to the chief or the sergeant, and just come back with more detail on that notification.
Go ahead.
Yes, just to piggyback on Jose's points. You know, I don't think that we should necessarily rehash all the specifics, but I think that, you know, because I don't think that's going to get us anywhere, you know, making some recommendations or enhancing the report. One thing we can do, though, is on this line where it says that, let me see.
The information gap?
No, that the department, the commission needed to have the same level of access to the department, if not more, as the court monitor. I think that, you know, I'm thinking it already has. It had that same level of access. You know, all you had to do was not all you had to do, but there was a certain level of request. If the commission by a majority vote, you know, requested, you know, an IAD investigation that you knew or you were made aware of, then through that request, that must be given to you. So you did have the same level. So if we can, let's affirm that you do have the same level of access, but let's look into how can we make sure that the police commission uses that accessibility, uses that authority. I think that we need a line with that, is that, you know, it's there. And if the commission or commissioners or chair or vice chair, any one of those entities are made aware of this, you know, then that's, you know, they must request more information. So you understand what I'm saying is that you already had that same access. How do we ensure that you use that accessibility and authority? Thank you.
Any other thoughts? Thank you for that.
Jesse, did you have a, and maybe Lieutenant Hubbard too, do you all have an opinion or what your viewpoint is on the authorization here and the authority here?
No opinion per se. However, my understanding is that the commission does have already that authority, and I think it's warranted.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shea, as I understand it, is that CIPRA, if all of CIPRA's investigations, they are required to share those investigations with IAD. IAD, on the other hand, is not required to share those investigations with CIPRA unless they're asked. So that's the accessibility that you have. And so, that's the process that we need to make sure. And I believe that's what Lieutenant Hubbard was referencing, that, it already exists. It just needs to be used.
I'm sorry to belabor this point, but Mariano, is there a reason why there isn't just an and is there a reason to not just ask for like an automatic reciprocity in the sharing? Like, why does there have to be a request? And that procedural step seems to be an
Yes.
issue that can create this problem.
Right. I'm not sure why. That's the way the Measure LL and Measure S1 are written, and the ordinance follows that. That should and can be changed. I know that in the CIPRA, what is that? The ad hoc that I served on the CIPRA policies, we talked about that what the commission can do is that at every beginning of every meeting is request from IED any internal investigations that are not being shared, that they request that. And so that's the formal request. And I believe, and Commissioner Shea can maybe give us more information. I believe that that's the case, or at least it was practiced in a few meetings, that request. Thank you.
I appreciate the questions and I appreciate the discussion. When we talk about the same level of access to the department, I think, Nikki, you have sort of highlighted a particular issue that comes up, which is there are some procedural barriers to the amount of access that the court monitor may have. Commission meets twice a month. It requires a vote. It requires a decision point. It requires sort of being able to have the specific IAD numbers, being able to sort of make that request, have that request transmitted, have it figured out. And we are at that point, perhaps a few weeks behind the ball. But at the same time, the recommendations that came from that previous memo, when they discussed an information gap, they kind of highlight a few very specific points which are down below, which reflect that, yes, the commission does have that same level of access, but it also is not the same as the court monitor, right? It's not necessarily the same. It doesn't have that quick access. It doesn't have those reports that are given or spoken about to the CMC. It doesn't have that authority to really speak about it in such a way that the court may listen. which is why the specific recommendations that were made around this point and around this information gap. And I describe information gap as, whatever it might be, whether it's we're in the dark or we are a couple of weeks behind the ball or months behind the ball for getting that information. It is a different level of access to the department as the monitor, even if it's just a timing aspect. And so the 4 recommendations really talk about sort of figuring out ways, and I agree, it is figuring out ways to make sure that the commission knows about the information it needs to know about to exercise its authority it has. We're not saying that we should just be there at every step or have the exact same, but we need the information to know what we don't know in order to exercise that authority we have. And so you're right, this language has a little bit more nuance and needs to be tweaked. But that's why we had as the previous recommendations, broadening a definition of serious incident to include internal investigations in the command level staff, because at the moment, the notifications that I think Jose was talking about are that the chair normally gets generally revolve around serious misdemeanors or felony conduct by officers, not necessarily the type of investigations that we saw from earlier this year or late last year involving command level staff. To ask the court monitor to give regular closed session briefings to the police commission, the CPRA, and the OIG on the status of compliance issues, so that the commission can have a voice and really be able to speak knowledgeably about those compliance issues. And as was discussed in the CPRA ad hoc, policies ad hoc, create a standard practice for the commission to have access to confidential files and records. Maybe it is at every single meeting making that request for ID materials, and of course having a better system of being able to manage what will eventually be a lot of materials being requested and accessed, and having access to those for the commission for those. So I agree. I think this language does need to be tweaked, does get to that point, and you all have brought up some very good points. I appreciate it. Let me just take this, put a pin on it, and then reframe it. Or if we have time to wordsmith it, I'll come back and wordsmith it. But let's keep going through the document if we can. Okay. So this is this ad hoc's work over the last, has it already been a month and a half, if not more, almost 2 months? Identifying 3 priorities, asking 3 questions. I added this additional section, this subsection A, because we had a great discussion last time about identifying what it is that it is the culture of Oakland, right? And part of our homework between last Monday and today was for sort of a development of what that statement of OPD's culture is. I hope you all have had an opportunity to think about that and to work on that. I, on my part, pulled together some things that I found that may inform some of it, some statements from the most recent case management conference. I pulled the department's most recent report or vision statement and got together their mission statement, their vision, and their values. And then also the mayor's statement at the CMC conference for us as a launch off point or a starting point. So perhaps we could have this discussion, which is, what suggestions do you have as to what to call or what the statement on OPD's culture should be? What it is and then what we want it to be. Let me be more specific about that.
I'll go ahead and kick us off if you don't mind. I will talk about the project reset program that we have through Stanford. And if you don't mind, I'll address it through what the younger officers or newer generation wants the culture to be. They have spoken candidly about the pressure that they have to hurry up through things. So they go to, let's say, a call for service where a person is victimized, and they feel this um, inherent pressure to hurry through the problem and move on to the next problem, where a lot of our younger officers just want to lean into it and actually provide customer service. So, if I may speak to the future culture of OPD, I hope it's that of customer service. And I have a high value that I place on our patrol officers who are our first line officers. I know we spoke about incentivizing the need for officers and the want for officers to be part of our patrol program and lean into that as much as they can. But hopefully, customer service is the future of our police department. Thank you.
Commissioner Shea, so I agree with Lieutenant Hubbard, but underscoring service to the community, I think has to have a healthy and nourishing atmosphere. And by that, I mean that, there should be a feeling, just like you said, if officers have felt like, they need to hurry up, that's not a healthy and nourishing environment. A non-retaliatory environment, if an officer or officers view something or see something, they should be able to feel that, they can speak up. That's a healthy and nourishing environment. So, I although I agree with him, that service should be, first and foremost, but it has to be within an environment that can provide that, and not provided with a bunch of baggage, that has belonged to, that's been the history of the OPD. Thank you.
And I appreciate that. I want to see if there's some way that we can bring that to words about service. So can you describe a little bit more, or perhaps give an example of what it is that you mean?
Yes, sir. And if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and write this for you. But for those who don't know, an officer has 30 minutes before a dispatcher asks the officer to extend his or her time. So let's say I'm dispatched to a burglary call. After 30 minutes of being dispatched, the dispatcher will ask the officer to extend his or her time. And what that does is it pressurizes him to or her to speed up the process. And the victim of that crime will feel those effects. So what I want to do is hopefully create a culture where emphasis is placed on customer service, where the officer doesn't feel those effects and they can, from start to finish, allow the victim to feel like justice is served, whether through a report or just sitting there talking to them of how they can improve their environment to safeguard future harm of crime, etc. So that's been a secret project that I've been working on, but if you don't mind, Jesse, I will be happy to write that for you.
I appreciate that. This is the sort of thing that we've got to get this going. So let's take some more comments about it, and then try to see if we can piece that together or get that done relatively quickly. I appreciate the offer. Jose?
Yeah, well, a couple things. One is that I appreciate the lieutenant's explanation of the pressure, because I was unaware of dispatch asking officers out in the field after 30 minutes whether they want an extension of time. I could certainly see the, the pressure from that. The thing I have to contrast that with, though, is that on June 19th, one of my, I probably mentioned this, but on June 19th, David Schneider, my neighbor from a block away, was shot and killed at 6 o'clock in the afternoon while he was trimming his trees. We don't know the details of what happened. I got a couple of speculations. The point is that he was killed right there. And there were 19 police officers there at the end of our block for 4 hours. And there was two things that struck me. One is the amount of time that 19 officers were out there. And two was that what the community, I mean, we live in a wonderful neighborhood in Maxwell Park, and we're still in shock over David's death, his murder. And especially the people, the neighbors, I live down at the end of the block, the neighbors directly around them were really struck by the casual nature of the police officers that were there. They were joking and laughing, and this was not, to say the least, appropriate in a setting where one of our neighbors was murdered in broad daylight. So there's two things. One is the amount of time, the number of officers, and their attitude at that murder site. So I have to contrast that with and appreciate Lieutenant's explanation. But the opposite of that, I would think, I don't know why 19 officers have to be there for 4 hours. Certainly there has to be an investigation, etc. I don't know that required 19 officers. So that's one. Two, I don't know that many officers needed to be out there for 4 hours. Certainly the investigators had to do a thorough job. I'm not taking issue with that, but there weren't 19 investigators out there. And three, the joking and laughing was totally inappropriate and really made there was a great deal of resentment, myself included, at that when I heard about that. So the contrast of that would have been just having inspectors there so that patrol officers could do their jobs in the rest of the community, and obviously would not have need to have been there for that long. And last, that the empathy that should have been shown and should be shown to any crime victim, certainly, should be an absolute requirement, and more so for an officer who really wants to lean in and demonstrate that by their attitude in writing the report and relating to the crime victim, etc. So those are three things that I have direct knowledge of in my neighborhood that happened: the number of officers, the amount of hours they spent there, and their attitude that jumped out at me in relation to Lieutenant Hubbard's remarks. Thank you.
I appreciate you sharing. Sorry, both for that experience as well as what you experienced in the aftermath. I want to take a moment and see if I have accurately captured sort of the values that you've mentioned or have described as the story that you've mentioned, which is what I think are the utilization of resources, and then the lack of empathy by officers about the situation that they were in. Is that fair? Is that accurate? Should it be different?
Yes. No, that is in essence what my 3 points were.
I'm sorry to boil it down. So like,
Yeah, that's fine. That's it.
yeah, okay. I am also taking down notes from Pastor Jackie. Pastor Jackie, do you want to share or do you just stick with the text? Either way is fine.
I'll stick with the chat, but I'm also working on what the culture should be. But I just want to kind of bring some larger context and really emphasize that all of this results in a strained relationship in the community. And good evening, everyone. Since this is my first time greeting everyone, good evening.
Thank you.
It's not lost to me that what Officer Hubbard said about customer service and what Mariano brought in about having a workplace environment that can allow for good service. It seems to be what Jose was describing as an example. You know, officers who aren't empathetic at a neighborhood murder site where, you know, in broad daylight where children were probably just being let out of school. And Jose, I'm really sorry that happened in your neighborhood. I'm sorry for all of Oakland, because I think that really like affected all of us. It's because there is something in the culture that doesn't allow for that empathy to show up, right? And I think we know that inherently for the profession has that issue. It's like a very male-driven, little toxic kind of space that doesn't deal with trauma the way that we know we can better deal with trauma these days, right? It's just not lost to me. The good customer service and the ability to deal with trauma internally and be able to process for officers all goes hand in hand. So like a cultural shift that allows for that will eventually allow for customer service that actually feels in alignment with how the community already holds itself.
Thank you. Jose.
Lieutenant Hubbard, in a murder site like David's murder, is there, and I guess for lack of a better term, an automatic counseling that's done, or at least offered to the officers that respond to murders? Is that something that happens automatically, or is there an offer? I just wonder how OPD offers a service to the officers going through that kind of a you have to say it, trauma. You know, somebody, I mean, you know, it was David's blood was right there on Marty and Susan's walk, which are they're good friends of ours, live next door to David. So the point being, is there some sort of an offer of counseling that's automatically done, or at least offered to any officers that respond to a crime scene?
Thank you, Commissioner Gerardo, and I agree with everything that you said, and thank you so much for your words of wisdom. The answer is no, it's not automatic. From my experience, and wellness, if you all don't know, falls under the training section. Wellness and counseling, if you will, or a debrief of certain events are somewhat arbitrary. So to answer your question, no, this did not fall into the category of automatic counseling. However, based on what you said, I think that, you know, because officers deal with trauma every single day, there should be an automatic trigger, if you will, for some type of counseling, because I do think that especially our younger officers, it can lead to harm in their personal and professional life, and I think we should expand that service to them.
Jose, is your hand still up?
Yeah, I just raised it again. Thank you, Lieutenant Hubbard. I appreciate that. And I do think this is an important point, because people deal with trauma differently. So it could be that, who knows, many of the officers were covering up what they were feeling by joking and laughing. It wasn't a matter of disrespect. It was a matter of their trying to process our neighbor dead there on the ground for no good reason. So that may be part of it. But if in fact it was, I would think if it's in fact an automatic and usual way that these scenes are dealt with in terms of counseling, it's not a matter of anybody questioning somebody's quote manliness or toughness. It's a question of that they would be going through this counseling just as a matter of course, and that's everybody that responds to a murder scene. So it not only would be, I think, deeply useful in any respect, but also nobody that was involved in that counseling would be, subject to somebody else saying, "Oh, you're not tough enough to handle this." So, thank you.
Commissioner Shea, it's a little hard for me to understand. So counseling regarding the trauma or the severity of the scene for officers, but then also there should be counseling regarding, protocols or how to act or how they acted, their response, the laughing, the joking, so I don't know if that's counseling or if it's review or so those two things have to happen, because I can see definitely if you're out there on the daily, seeing this kind of trauma, then you could easily, just accept it and not really deal with it. But then the other, if you're dealing with it the way, these officers acted at this scene, then that definitely, needs to be addressed. Because and then the question I have for Lieutenant Hubbard, he mentioned that wellness is part of training, and that's the only wellness of officers. Is that mental health, counseling, all that that falls under training, and you mentioned that it should be automatic. How can we make that happen? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. It should be done via policy. Right now, it's somewhat arbitrary, as in, let's say there's a unique critical incident that occurs. There's someone who says, "Oh, we should use our in-house clinician to offer services," where I think it should be more of a policy where if this occurs, then this automatically is triggered as a result. So, and I really appreciate the conversation because it does fall under my umbrella in training. And our wellness director, Raquel Neto, she's very talented in what she does. And she wants wellness for all employees for the city of Oakland, certainly in the police department. And it would really help us if we had some type of policy or SOP that will help support our efforts to ensure that empathy and training is instilled in our officers and also exuded to our community.
I appreciate the discussion, and thank you, Pastor Jackie, for also adding that it should be considered setting a regular cycle as opposed to event triggered only. I want to take us just a little bit back. I know we're starting to talk about implementation, resources, how we might get to that point. It feels like the goal or the value that we're all talking about and we're all moving towards might be two things. Empathy, the ability of officers to empathize with the community, the victims of crimes, the people who they police, as well as focusing on officer wellness so that they have the capacity to empathize. Is that how do people feel about those two values? As we're discussing what we hope the goal of what the OPD's culture should be, as opposed to how we get there.
I would agree with that. Thank you.
Let me know your thoughts. Don't ask, just go for it.
Yeah, because all this is driving towards how it affects culture change, and so wellness, counseling, protocols, all that, we could have all that in place, but if it's not going to be affecting the current culture change, then it's not working. So yeah.
That is part of what this ad hoc as well as this commission's work is going to be, absolutely, for the foreseeable future. And to the extent that the court and the NSA aren't able to address those things and outside of the NSA tasks, but of course we get to decide what we want that culture to be in the future, right? And then move towards that. And so I want to start thinking about what is it that we want it to be, what values, what values, what culture, or what values are exemplified by that culture or demonstrated in that culture that we want to go towards. I think I'm saying that right. I'm not sure. Let me just pull up, as we're talking about where we want the department to go, the actual mission statement, the vision, and the core values of the department, and how close that is to what we're thinking, or whether that should change, or whether there needs to be more. So let me do that. This was the strategic plan from 2020, I think it's 2023 to 2025. I think here we have some elements of what we've been talking about. Provide police service, focused on public safety and the sanctity of life, to hold ourselves, meaning the department, accountable to a high standard of conduct, efficiency and efficacy, and to promote mutual respect between the department and the communities of Oakland. I note that what we don't have in there, or what's not quite in there, are what we talked about, have been mentioned here today: collaboration, empathy, wellness, but definitely the focusing on customer service, police service, and addressing public safety. Just give everyone a moment to think, reflect, if there's anything to add. Jose?
Well, certainly, collaboration can be easily put between mutual respect, and it would flow with I think that thought of mutual respect and collaboration.
Respect, collaboration. I want to thank you. I appreciate that. Other thoughts?
So are we reviewing the statement, or are we critiquing it? I'm not quite sure what what
Could
would
be
be.
either, whichever you feel, because the next question I'm going to ask is this a statement of culture that we want it to be or not?
Well, so when I read this, I think of, I mean, it could be a philosophical kind of statement. That's the way I read it. And so I cannot approach it philosophically, I have to approach it concretely, and, how I see things as being real. And that's that, to provide police service focused on public safety and the sanctity of life, to hold ourselves accountable, high standards. So I immediately think of, officers paying informants, to make up stuff, for courts, not reporting, racial profiling, joking around and laughing at sites like the one that Jose was mentioning. So when that's the way I have to look at this statement. And so, and I believe that officers and OPD in general needs to look at this statement in that same fashion. When a police officer drives up to my neighbor's house and blocks my driveway, or blocks the street, and I've seen this happen over and over throughout the city, that's not, accountable. That's not efficient. That's not, that's showing a position of power. I own this street, I'm here, I'm the authority. And, if I need to block the street, I'm going to block the street. So that's the way I have to look at this statement, is how I see reality. Thank you.
And I'll just echo what was said. This was created by Chief Armstrong when he first took over, and I really appreciate it, but I would challenge how many officers actually know this and actually value it. And so I think a bigger question is more than just the words that you see on the screen here, is what can we do to ensure that all employees at the Oakland Police Department know this and understand it, but also value it. And that's the challenge that I see. I can easily invoke it in our academy, but beyond that, that's where it becomes a challenge.
I really, Jose, go ahead, go first.
Okay, thanks. That's a really interesting point, Lieutenant Hubbard. I wonder when police officers actually come into contact with this mission statement. I wonder if, in fact, it's part of and I'm not real familiar with the structure of lineups, but I wonder if it's part of the materials that are distributed at lineups. Is it articulated? I guess not. So at what point? So I guess my question is, Lieutenant, at what points would the quote average officer come into contact with this statement and actually see it and have an opportunity to read it, and more so even think about it? Does that happen on a regular basis, and when would it happen?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the reading it I don't think is uncommon, but the thinking about it I think is more challenging. And yes, we do introduce it into many different venues. And anecdotally, if I can just share, we do talk about this in our Project Reset sessions. And the only people that I found that have raised their hand to say, yes, I understand what our mission and value statement is, are those who are taking a promotional exam, where they're almost required to understand it and think about it in an effort to get promoted. But for the basic line officer or sergeant or lieutenant or commander, I don't see much critical thought into it. And that's really what I hope to shift is I just don't want it to be words. I want it to permeate throughout the police department and for them to have a solid understanding of it.
Thank you.
Jesse, I think I'm having a hard time engaging because I think mission statements and vision statements are a great tool that leaders use to bring, the masses together. But what we're talking about is a need for leadership at the police department, leadership that invokes trust in the community. And this, wordsmithing a mission statement or talking about the tool, but not talking about the leadership is hard for me.
I appreciate that. Certainly. I'm not suggesting that we retool this in any particular way, but certainly it is, in my mind, as we're talking about what perhaps the goal or what the culture should be of Oakland Police Department, what the goal is. These statements certainly came to mind in sort of being able to frame where the department wants to be or should be, or where we want the community to have it to be. These statements having discussions about, or these statements, the statement, the vision, and the values, having those components that we have been talking about. Customer service, right? So, and so I don't mean to bring these up as saying, do we fix these? My question is, do these evoke the same thoughts of this is what the culture we want the culture to be?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I think the mission statement for me is like hard to engage with because it like really sheds light to how the police force sees the professionalization of like safety and care and trust in the community as just police services, right? And police services really invokes like the legacy of what policing is about and how many times it has already shown to screw over the same populations over and over again and not serve the same populations. So I feel like, this is really a professionalized viewpoint of what we're, and the culture change is to say like, you actually have to shift away from seeing yourselves as, these, from this legacy of what policing is, and really, and maybe that's what Project Reset is helping to do, but really just to pivot to a different viewpoint of where you're headed towards. And I just can't get out of my head what Pastor Jackie and said, and then what Mariano exemplified in his example. Like, it is the mistrust that keeps coming up here. And that's the cornerstone of it. Like, for me, a mission statement would be like the mission is to provide trust, to keep trust in the community, trust amongst neighbors and systems in the community.
And just to push that a little bit further, that how do we get to that trust? Is it that that the department fosters it, enables it, promotes it, or like, is it between the community and the police? Like,
I'm not sure, but in my work, we have to practice it. That's how we do things. You practice through various ways that you have to. And some of it's laid out in like the next steps, right? Like, you have to acknowledge the wrongdoing, and you have to find ways and rituals and ways to notice like how your behavior affects other people. Like, if you're laughing at a neighborhood tragedy and now it's traumatized the neighbors, that doesn't help. You're not really fostering that trust, and you're not really fostering that care for the community that your profession has professionalized.
And then there's also the more general um, culture that follows public narrative, that like, let's admit, there is a public safety in not only in Oakland, but throughout the country is is under attack essentially. And when you hear that police officers are making statements that, well, our hands are tied, well, we don't have enough, we're understaffed, we don't have enough officers, we really can't do anything. That those are political kind of positions that they're taking, or statements. And that's also a sort of more clearer manifestation of the culture that really exists, is that they're going to follow I'm referring to the narrative that law enforcement puts out, that we need more money, we really can't stop certain drivers because then we'll get accused of racial profiling, all these sort of excuses, or that I think is the other part, that who's responsible in, as Nikki says, in leadership to address that. Is there, do you send out a memo, or do you have morning meetings or shift meetings where you say, that's not our position, you don't you don't take political positions, you're here to follow this mission, to follow, so that's just another sort of larger picture that also addresses, how do you control that, that narrative that officers seem to, repeat. Thank you.
What's that?
Yeah, another question for the lieutenant. In what sort of scenario would you see a discussion of the mission statement where it would be most useful? If you were if you were chief, and you felt as though this was something that needed to be done, that is, provide the time and the space for officers all the way up and down the ranks to contemplate and think about the essence of what that mission statement says. Where would you create that time and space?
Yeah, no, thank you. And Mariana, before I answer that, thank you for your words. I agree with everything you just said. Commissioner Tirado, I would feel that if I were the chief, and I'll just take it for what it is, based on me as the training commander, but also with my staff, is I don't want them necessarily to memorize the mission statement, because to them it could just be words. But what I want every decision to be is through the lens of that mission statement, as in what the curriculum that you build, let's say, to teach our new recruits and our field training officers, does it value the sanctity of life? Does it promote efficiency and efficacy, and does it promote customer service? And it's so what I want to do is just add value to what they do through a certain lens, and that lens being the mission statement. Therefore, it invokes an understanding, but also a value behind that, as opposed to just words that they just would narrate out loud. That's what I'm hoping for, and I hope the chief would do the same. Where we're producing a lot of emails, a lot of policy, a lot of decision daily. That's what I hope to shift to. Is okay. Here's our mission statement. Here's our values. Here are our values. Whatever decision you're making, Commander X, Y, and Z, does it fall within the lens, or is it viewed through the lens of this? And if not, then you need to go back and rework it. And when you then push it down to your line officers, your civilian staff, whatever it may be, ensure that they understand it and also hold that same value.
Thank you.
Pastor Jackie.
I think perhaps the challenge is twofold. While there are those who believe that language and words are not necessarily important, the reality is one of the ways culture is transmitted is through language. And the mission statement as it currently stands, I dare say, I really do believe that if you were to ask the average officer if they were fulfilling the mission of the department, they would believe that they would. But that is not the rub. The language is so general and it's so benign and it's so almost ethereal that it leaves room for many of the things that Brother Mariano brought up. That's my first thing. My second thing is if it is to reflect what we are attempting to do around culture, it would probably need to have a statement that reflects that. Added to that, whether or not that's this group's work, I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying, as it stands presently, no, it does not reflect what it is we're trying to do. Now, whether this should be a change in the mission statement, or perhaps, since you just put up the core values, adding the core value of empathy, wholeness, wellness, whatever we land on or we will land on, perhaps that is a place to add those themes and be able to expound on them and then do some of the work that Jose is talking about with and among officers. But if you do not say it, then it's guaranteed that it won't be modeled. Because at the end of the day, we make the statements, but it is the behavior that actually drives the culture, which makes the reading of it and even trying to analyze it and tweak it an issue and a challenge. And I see the question in the chat. And again, the question gives rise to my actual point. Because the way it is written currently, anybody who looks at it is going to see it different. And so I think if we want to see some changes in behavior, then the standards and expectations could probably stand to be a bit more clear around some of the things that we have stated and lifted up that have been historically toxic and presently toxic in the culture.
Commissioner Shea, this is actually the first time I've heard the word value, discussed in this group. And I think that's really important, and, in circles and in indigenous circles, current, restorative justice circles, healing, listening circles. One of the first things that participants are asked is, what value do you want to carry through this circle? And then at the end is what value or values that you hear that you want to continue after the circle. And, perhaps, that's what, instead of the values that I see up there now, fairness, integrity, is ask officers, ask, all ranks, what are their values, as a police officer, what do they see the value that they can carry, on an everyday basis, or what's a value that they think that they can learn from, so I think that, that's, it's important to that word value. I see it there now, and I think that, if I could be wrong, but this is the first time that I think that we've talked about that as part of the mission, as part of culture, that's a very important aspect and part of culture. If you got some white supremacist values, that's the way the culture is going to go.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly.
I'm switching away from the strategic plan to have some of the words, the values, potentially what the goals or what the culture should have. It's kind of an amalgamation of some of the things that we've talked about, but they're not fully developed ideas yet, right? Of what we want the culture to be. They're just words. They're subject areas. And I want to see if I can just take a little bit of time to sort of develop each one of these and consistent with what we've been discussing. Let me start with the first one, empathy. Empathy is sort of, I know we've talked about empathizing with the community, empathizing with the victims of crime. Does that go further? The people who are being policed, the people who are affected by that? And in what way should that empathy be? If there's more words that we can get there. Really trying to press on this, like staying away from vague value terms and really get to where we want to be. Sorry, this is taking so long, but really pressing.
Empathy, I think, to me, to make it fuller, it has to have equitable empathy. Okay. That just means across the board, from the flats to the hills, across the board.
I agree. And I'll just add something that I instill very early in the minds of our police officer trainees is that every call that you go to, that is the most important call that you'll ever go to in your career. And if you approach it as such, then your behavior, your empathy will, in your heart, really will come true to that victim, to that witness, that suspect, whatever that may be. That is the most important thing that you're going to deal with in your career.
So, Officer Lieutenant Hubbard, so what kind of response or what kind of evaluation do you give that statement? That when you make that statement to officers, how do they respond? Do they take that too hard? Are they seeing every call as the most important call that they have, or how do you evaluate that? Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Again, it's very easy for me to promote that in the academy because these are new officers who are ambitious, who want to be officers, if you will, and even in field training. I just lose connection when officers graduate the field training program. And that's where I'm no longer involved in their lives. But I just hope that I can plant that seed early to where they remember that. How I evaluate that, of course, is through the academy. It's easy because we do provide many tests throughout the academy, and I can tell those who are going through the motions just to pass the test versus those who genuinely have a heart for law enforcement and care for the community. And I can definitely, in my position, hold them accountable for those actions.
Okay.
Yeah, I would suggest adding in front of empathy, demonstrated empathy. It would be wonderful to have an officer feel, and of course that comes across. But not only should they apply empathy equitably, but also be trained, I would think, in how they can best demonstrate that empathy, especially if in fact they're going to be dealing with any number of different cultures in the community. So how can they, it's great if they really and truly and sincerely felt some empathy in a situation, but I think it needs to be taken a bit further in terms of training the officers how they can demonstrate that and do it culturally competent in a culturally competent way. So I think that would certainly go a long way to begin to allay the mistrust and to begin to begin to have a collaborative relationship with the community in those kinds of ways. And one of the ways I think of is that there's any number of crimes, certainly from murder on down, where people in the community have information on the perpetrators, on how this crime occurred, but they're not willing, for any number of reasons, to provide that information to OPD. But I think you begin to break down that barrier by demonstrating in real ways, again, culturally competently, that you're empathetic in your job of being a police officer in the community in a particular situation. And I always go back to when I want to demonstrate this, I go back to the story many years ago, probably 10 or 15 years ago, that there was some sort of a rap video down in West Oakland that was being filmed, and one of the persons involved in it had brought his 1-year-old son, and they had video of the 3 guys that came and shot up that video taking, and the poor baby was killed. And that murder of that poor child was solved in a matter of days because the community was so outraged. It wasn't but a few days before they had some names, and they were able to arrest the guys that were involved. The point being that the community knows a great deal. What would it take to begin to build those bridges and build that trust so that the community begins to provide the kind of information to OPD that is needed to solve some of these crimes, begin to bring the murder rate down. But the flip side is doing it in a compassionate way. That is, when in fact the perpetrators are caught for whatever kind of a crime, and in fact there's a real component of restorative justice if it's applicable, etc. Not just putting the quote bad guys in jail, but it's a 2-part deal where this community provides information so that people are held accountable, but at the same time taking into account not making over the problem of over incarceration worse. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you, Commissioner Gerardo. And Jesse, just to close the loop on what he said, to some actionable deliverables, and I'll write this for you. I would, along with the lines of what we discussed before, have community members participate in our transition course of newly graduated officers before they hit field training, to have a lesson and discussion on what Commissioner Gerardo said. And I respect his wisdom. It's perfect what he said. I like to build a curriculum based on that. I think that would be appreciated by all. And if you don't mind, I'll be happy to write that for you.
Much appreciated. 7:27. I don't know if we're going to finish this, but I'd like to try to take some time with this recording and go through this and try to develop some statements of what the goal of the culture should be. I also have, I think, a good amount of statements about what the culture currently is. So I'll be working on that. I appreciate any additional thoughts or direction to give additional direction to the words that we're bringing up of the values, but really what the culture of Oakland this police department should be as we start to work through this, trying to get there, trying to like wordsmith, and I'm realizing we'll be here all night. I will continue to work on this. I will, when I have figured it out, send it to the group, post it. I think we'll have I'm glad that I made that open session on Monday to sort of bring this conversation to the broader public. I hope you all join if you're able to, or at least to get additional input to sort of work on this. Because I apologize for not having it in a better form for you all, but I think this is a really good discussion, and we're getting there. We're getting to the place where we need to be. I very much appreciate the work. I'm going to take maybe a little bit more of your time just to see if there's anything else in the rest of the document that anyone wants to bring up now before we start to turn down. I will slowly go through some of the other changes since. I know that when we first gave this to you, you only had like a day or two, actually probably just a day to go over it. You've had some more time to go through the document and have thoughts about it. And I love your thoughts, feedback, so that I can incorporate them into this document. So I'm going to turn. Turn to our first recommendation, acknowledging bad past practices. I have changed many of the places where scandal was, instead of just changed it to officer misconduct where it grammatically made sense, or reworded it in a way that I could do so. Let's see. I placed the anecdote that was discussed about a young OPD officer. Jose, this was you telling us about your experience with a young officer who sort of didn't really understand why the community had the view of OPD that it did, and you made a suggestion that they wrote or that they read the book, and they said, no, I don't want to do that. And we had a little bit more discussion about what that meant. And I sort of put that into the document so that the community's sort of how that looks to the community and community's opinion about that, and really sort of setting that divide so that the court knows there is this divide and there is this cultural problem, and what it means to the community and why those actions still cause mistrust in the community is explicit in there. Let's see.
Jesse, just a quick comment on that. The point I think becomes stronger when he explained to the judge that this is a good cop. This is somebody who really is empathetic and really sees his role very, very seriously in terms of serving the community. So how is it that a good cop that's really invested at an emotional level still doesn't see the value in really doing some research into the history of OPD? So that's a big gap. I mean, if he was a jerk, it'd be different, but he's not. He's a good cop, but how is it that he doesn't see the value? Is something I think that makes that point stronger. Thank you.
I have made a note to myself to incorporate that in some way. I know better than to wordsmith on the fly. Okay. I also sort of expanded a little bit on this second. Yes, I expanded a little bit more about how incorporating the lessons and the bad past and bad past practices and acknowledging them would incentivize officers to maintain ethical baselines in their work and thinking. Lieutenant Hubbard, I think, gave us a very good example today that I might try to incorporate, which is, the department has a vision statement, has mission statement, or vision, mission statement, and core values, but to the extent that each officer knows or should knows, only those who are trying to get to sergeant or trying to get to a higher level really understand them. And hopefully that sort of bringing that the lessons of where those values came from and why they are there, or others, or where we want the culture to be, will further enforce those and bring some real life examples and to really capture their attention. Okay. Let's see. Officer misconduct. I added a footnote, 2 footnotes in this section about how or what might the department do to implement this topic. Dropped a footnote, the explanation of what Project Reset was, from what I could tell and figured out, as well as sort of our discussion from last time about, well, how are we going to pay for these trainings? How is it going to happen? What's going to happen? And sort of set down there that this is work that is yet to be figured out, and we're going to continue doing that work, and a commitment to continuing doing that work. In what form, in what way, or to find these answers, to know that we don't necessarily have all the answers, but this is a continuing conversation and implementation. I recognized from last week that there was a line in here that said this does not require that OPD members be tested on historical facts of these scandals, and I added the clause, but they could if they so choose. I wonder how the ad hoc feels about this, because I remember this being a strong point. I saw a thumbs up from Mariano, sort of acknowledging that it does not foreclose it. They should really think about it. And this is a direction to them that they perhaps should think about it, or at least I feel like it's a direction. Maybe I should just very explicitly say that they should and should consider doing so. Okay. I added a third sorry, Mariana.
Oh, no, go ahead. That's the one. Go.
I added a third recommendation that actually came from a little bit down below, and what Lieutenant Hubbard talked about. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks ago, about how the department could do a better job about debriefing major misconduct incidents that occur, recognizing that the department may itself have limitations on being able to discuss these things as they're working their way through the administrative process. But Lieutenant Hubbard did provide a very good suggestion about how they could still debrief major misconduct incidents that come up in national news that aren't part of OPD, to sort of incorporate other issues or large officer misconduct incidents that cause mistrust in the communities that the departments serve, and how OPD can avoid that in the future.
On that one, Commissioner Shea, I think that, with investigations or, looking into misconduct that are already done and, resolved in whatever way, they've been resolved, I think it's important for the department to look at the local ones, because that way they can directly learn from, what officer so-and-so did, our own officer, how that was covered up or not covered up, learning from an incident, misconduct, from another city. Sure, that's almost a hypothetical for me, and I think it's really important to learn exactly how your department acted, during this major misconduct in our own department. So whenever it can be done, legally, and after the investigation is done and resolved, I think it's important to learn from actual incidences here within the department. Thank you.
Before I go to you, Jose, I want to double check. Pastor Jackie, you have culture in all caps. Which part were you referring to so that I can capture that?
No, that was the answer to Jose's question as to how a good officer could decline to read the book Writers. That's culture. So that's what I was referencing. So it can be noted or not.
I appreciate it. Thank you for explaining. I'm sorry I missed it in the time. Okay, Jose.
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to underscore what Mariano said, because there's so many lessons here, particularly when there's a direct connection between, corrupt officers in another but local department and their direct connection with OPD officers. What does that demonstrate in terms of the culture of OPD, not to mention the culture of local police departments in general, but also what does that demonstrate about the lessons that need to be learned and the policies that need to be written to address that corruption.
And by the same token, learn from the good judgment calls that happen. Also, it doesn't all have to be negative.
Yeah.
Thank you. I will incorporate that last part. I have a little bit more time. Sources or experts? Jose?
I just wanted to say on that note, we should be as good at getting rid of the bad cops as we are good at praising and raising up the good cops. We should be able to do both, the community as a whole.
Agreed. Let's see. Sources or experts? Anything to add? I cleaned this up a little bit to sort of have some groupings. Any additional suggestions? Borrowing you all for just a little bit more time. Apologies for running late. Let's see, revising the discipline. So in this section, which talks about the discipline matrix, because there was such a discussion about the discipline policy that goes along with the discipline matrix, and at the suggestion of Lieutenant Kalange, I broadened the recommendation to also discuss revising or looking at the discipline policy. Especially when it came to especially because we focus so much on examining loopholes and accountability gaps, because the discipline matrix is what the discipline matrix is. It's just suggested ranges of punishment, as opposed to perhaps capturing those, as was described, loopholes and accountability gaps that perhaps there is that perhaps are occurring. That was I also added the word egregious here. I think because I don't think that the discussion revolved around eliminating all progressive discipline, but just specifically for those incidents that demonstrate a severely bad character or bad conduct of OPD officers. At the time, we were discussing truthfulness, falsifying police reports. I think there was body-worn camera mentioned a few times. Just to put a little bit of nuance on that particular point. How or what the department might do to implement this recommendation. Considering the point that we are at, I wrote that in connection with community partners, OPD should examine the discipline policy and discipline matrix to ensure that it has appropriate discipline ranges for the misconduct it seeks to punish. Discipline policy and discipline matrix covers all the misconduct it seeks to punish. I don't yet have an example, but I will find one. That is the portions about how or what might the department do to implement this recommendation at this time. I don't understand it's not concrete, it's not specific policy. It's just sort of, we need to look at this thing and we're recognizing that, or we want this as a community to focus on as not just revising the policy, but also as a step towards changing the culture in OPD. What sources or experts do we need to bring to the table to present? This is the same list. I still need to find a little bit more clarity on what the Jennifer Everhart study is. I will find that. Other sources or experts. Think about.
Commissioner Shea.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are a number of really good violence interrupters and first responders, violence prevention workers in the city of Oakland. And, you know, I don't know if this group considers those experts. I do. I think that, you know, we should maybe put some of those folks down. You know, there's Courage. That's Communities United for Restorative Justice, for Youth Restorative Justice. There's just a number of those, so I can send you that, you know, later. But am I out of pocket when I make these kind of recommendations, or you know, I mean, they're not, you know, Eberhard or, you know, anything like that, but I consider them experts because they're right there, boots on the ground.
If you can make the link for me, I will definitely hear you out. It makes a whole lot of sense. Is this the place, the discipline policy and the discipline matrix, or are there other places that you're thinking about?
There's, you know, other places, like maybe the one before that. No, you know what? No, right here. Yeah. The discipline matrix. Sure. You know, a lot of those folks, you know, are the ones that are calling, you know, why is there untruthfulness? You know, why are they getting away with this? You know, yeah. So they can certainly have an opinion and maybe some, you know, concrete recommendations for that.
Jose?
Yeah, I would recommend 3 persons along the lines of a violence interrupter. Kevin Grant, been around a long time, done a lot of wonderful work in Oakland for decades. And the other, if you could get them, would be Reagan Cunningham and Ursi Joyner, who had very good results with the ceasefire program probably 10 years ago. And by the way, Reagan Harmon, formerly Reagan Harmon, now Reagan Cunningham, is currently doing an audit of the ceasefire program for the mayor's office. And the results, at least the first report, will be coming out in November. So I'm very anxious to see what she comes up with, because she is the expert on ceasefire.
I may need to contact you offline to sort of get a little bit more about the connection and understand why it's happening, so I can present it in a compelling way. So look out for me calling you, not tonight, but perhaps this weekend.
And that's not Percy Joyner, it's Ursi,
Ursi.
Ersie. There you go.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Can you check the chat as well? If we're talking about violence interrupters, I added a name.
Yes, I got yours. Michael McBride, Live Free USA, and Family Violence Law Center. Okay, any others? Thank you. Last section, promoting ethical leadership and management for low to mid-level managers. Let's see. I made very explicit the portion here about how field training officers and sergeants promote culture and behavior in the manner they supervise, manage, and train, to tease that out a little bit more. Not just say they guide newer officers in the way they police and the standards they enforce. I also added this sentence, I think, that says training field training officers and sergeants to ethically lead and manage their subordinates will instill such an ethical behavior in officers. And then I made an additional note, which I wanted to make sure that the court knew that, yes, there were NSA tasks specifically devoted to the field training officer program, as well as aspects of supervisory training. That's where the 40-hour supervisor training came from, task 42 and 43. But that in order to really get at that culture change, the NSA may have reached its limit on what it can do in this implementation, and we want to go further. Specifically, I said it was insufficient to promote culture change, which is what our focus is.
Yep.
How or what might the department do to implement this topic? Let's see. I saw from some pieces of task 42 and task 43 some places for expansion. So one of the places where I did add was a section about integrating community input into screening and promotional exams, because at the moment what they're looking for, and I think it's for both field training officers and sergeants, is they look at the number of complaints that are made. Sustained and non-sustained doesn't matter, but complaints. Because I think we all recognize that not everything makes it to the complaint stage. And so being able to integrate that community input is important to the extent that they can. And then also I didn't see anything specific about training to field training officers, but Lieutenant Hubbard, you did talk about that 40-hour training that sergeants go through as soon as they are promoted, or actually it looked like it was supposed to be before they were promoted. And considering that field training officers might also go through something like that or the same to promote that ethical behavior and management that we were hoping they instill in our newest officers.
They do. They go through a 40-hour course before they become field training officers.
Okay, we'll definitely take a look at that, and also I appreciate that. Thank you. I kept in the portion where I think Lieutenant Hubbard, you offered that that community members recommend scenario-based ethics testing for field training officers, non-standard organizational leadership trainings, and then, of course, closely monitor and supervise FTO sergeants and captains to ensure that its values of integrity and accountability are being reinforced throughout the entire department. I think I do need to develop that a little bit more, but that goes towards the sort of making sure that sergeants and field training officers are doing what the department expects them to do. What sorts of experts do we need to, sorry, I'm moving too fast. Thoughts on this particular section? Additions, comments, suggestions?
Looks good.
If it comes to you, either email me for me to integrate it or let us know on Monday. Just a little bit more time. I apologize. Finally, what sources or experts do we need to bring to the table to present? It's that same typo over and over again. Any additional sources or experts to consult with, to work with, to do? Jose.
Would it be appropriate to have Darwin Bond Graham and I forget the other author of writers uh, as experts? They did a really phenomenal job of researching Oakland history going back to the 1800s, and their final comment at the end of the book was to be aware of how OPD, as well as any police department, can backslide if in fact the pressure begins to dissipate. And certainly if the enough work is being done to alter to change the culture positively for in OPD, there's a less and less chance of that backsliding happening. So I really appreciated not only that they wrote the book, but that they included that comment at the very end.
Commissioner Shea, I'm going to recommend this guy. I don't know if people might know him, but I think he goes by Reginald Lyles. Our very own.
I've heard the name.
Thank you both. Any other suggestions, comments, thoughts? I have 5 more minutes to 8. I hope to not take all of them. Just a reminder about process. I'm going to find some time to get this cleaned up a little bit more, and to be able to post it in a public way, likely on the website. I think it is likely to be part of the agenda for Monday's police commission meeting, to be discussed at both potentially in closed session as well as in open session. I can't say exactly what we talk about in closed session. I really shouldn't do that. But then also, again, to be on the agenda for our Thursday police commission meeting, our regular meeting, so that we can really finalize this and have it as part of our submission to the court. I really appreciate all of the work and the extra time that you all have taken through this process. I know it was not easy. It is sometimes feels like we're going in all sorts of directions and at a loss, but I think this document itself and our discussion have organically created, I think, a very strong document that focuses on culture and about how the department can take 3 solid recommendations, community-driven, to really force that culture change that we are hoping about and that everyone keeps talking about. Really getting at that point, it is not the end. It's likely this work will continue. And stay tuned for next steps, even after our September CMC.
Commissioner Shea, I just want to uplift your ability and your desire to be transparent and inclusive for this Monday meeting. You apologize for doing sort of last minute, but there's when it involves, inclusiveness and transparency. There's no need to apologize. And I just want to thank you for doing that. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Other thoughts before we shut down and perhaps not meet for a bit? I know you all will miss me talking every week at you. Jose?
No, I just wanted to thank you and Lieutenant Hubbard and the members of the ad hoc for their efforts. Really, really just appreciate it. It's an honor to be a part of this group, and I just want to say thanks to everybody for the amount of effort they put in this. And gracias.
Again, thank you all. I also want to extend a thanks to Lieutenant Hubbard for being our last standing OPD member through these meetings. Thank you for your insight and your openness and your willingness to engage with these ideas. I think that is promising, and I hope that your openness to and working with the community here is one that is seen by other officers and sort of picked up on, and for lessons for them as a model to go after, follow. And
I appreciate that. Thank you all.
And again, thank you all for being a part of this. Community members, this is a lot. This is a lot. This is not your jobs. This is extra evenings, time away from your families. Again, thank you for the work. Thank you for the time. This is how we make things happen.
I think buenas noches is in order.
Adjourned. Have a good night. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks
Good
all.
night.
Good night.